Yes. Hare Krishna and Pranam, dear devotees. So welcome to our fifth session of Prabhupada-Founder Acharya series seminar. And we have His Grace Suresvara Prabhu with us. So we heartily welcome Suresvara Prabhu by loudly chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. His Grace Suresvara Prabhu ki jai, Jagadguru Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Hi, Srila Prabhupada. Okay, we're finally back. Hare Krishna. And we're in lesson 5 of the Founder Acharya Essentials series. It's called his ISKCON branch. And now I'm seeing you, Girat Prabhu. I don't see the slide though. So are you seeing the slide? Okay, you're muted. Okay, screen sharing. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so there you see under the famous tree. I thought that was appropriate because it's his ISKCON branch. And there's a tree. And Prabhupada would say that Tompkins Square Park preaching under that tree was really the start of his preaching in the West, his outreach. Okay, so now we go to slide 2. Shocking as it was, the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi in January 1948 only intensified Srila Prabhupada's desire to spread the teachings of Lord Chaitanya per the order of his Guru Maharaj. Unable to engage the Mahatma during his life, Abhay would now try to engage him in death. Here is an excerpt from a proposal Prabhupada first made to the Indian government. His spiritual vision of how to properly honor Gandhi. He called the proposal, quote, the Gita Nagari. Here's the excerpt quote. The Gita Nagari will properly utilize the huge resources of Mahatma Gandhi Memorial Fund. Gandhi's memory can be well preserved by his exemplary activities, and not by simply constructions of huge buildings or dead stone statues, which is what you saw on the slide. Mahatma Gandhi was saintly reformer, and his memorial fund may be utilized for the purpose of converting degraded persons into saintly order. So what Prabhupada had in mind was a dynamic, living, ongoing, like the memorial. Prabhupada urged the fund's director to, quote, to keep in motion Gandhi's spiritual movements. That was the phrase Prabhupada used, movements. Namely, his prayerful recitation of sacred sounds, his restoration of deities to temples, his recognition of everyone as a Harijan, a person of God, and his ideal of a spiritually harmonious society. Quote, the above fourfold Gandhi movements, he wrote, if done in an organized scientific way, supported by all the authentic scriptures of all religions, will bring in that tranquility of peace and a respite from all harshness and bitterness of the present world, which we have longed for till now. So that was Prabhupada's proposal. And unfortunately, they didn't listen to him. Fresh from independence, however, India's leaders longed only to be, quote, modern, and were uninterested in Prabhupada's spiritual proposals. Undaunted, Prabhupada moved on, and in 1952, he found his first receptive audience among medical students in the northern Indian town of Jhansi. One of the students was able to connect him with a pious estate executor who let him use the estate's property and buildings to teach and to rebrand his mission as, quote, the League of Devotees. Okay, so there you see. Prabhupada. Canvassing among the students, Prabhupada ran an ad in the local newspaper. Quote, wanted candidates from any nationality to qualify themselves as real Brahmins for preaching the teachings of Bhagavad Gita for all practical purposes throughout the whole world. Deserving candidates will be provided with free boarding and lodging. Apply, A.C. Bhaktivedanta, founder and secretary of the League of Devotees. So the peace that the League of Nations had failed to bring after World War I, and that the United Nations would also fail to deliver after World War II, the League of Devotees would now bring through systematic spiritual education, quote, and thereby achieve real unity and peace of the contending elements of the present world. The events that would compel Prabhupada to eventually set aside the League, leave his family, accept the renounced order of life, and finally journey alone to the West have been well documented in Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita. What concerns us here is how he finally established his mission as, quote, ISKCON, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, unfolding its purposes in distinct phases. So Prabhupada first he had his BTG, and then he tried to engage Gandhi. Gandhi was assassinated, and then Prabhupada thought that maybe the government would be open to memorializing Gandhi through something more dynamic than statues, which they didn't. They just wanted to, copy the West and be modern. So Prabhupada, then he had his first receptive audience as the League of Devotees, and then that ran its course. He couldn't, if you know the history from the Lilamrita, that wasn't what Krishna really ultimately had in mind for him. And then finally, finally he came west, as his Guru Maharaj had requested. And he started his own branch. So, a branch of Lord Chaitanya's movement. In his commentary to the Sri Chaitanya Chaitamrita Adi Leela 1273, Prabhupada identifies ISKCON as a, quote, branch of the Bhakti Kalpataru, Lord Chaitanya's desire tree of devotional service. Though but a branch, his mission carries the spiritual power to transplant the, quote, tree of love of Godhead worldwide. Prabhupada memorably begged for that empowerment in the poem he wrote the day he landed in America. As one verse reads, "O Lord, I am just like a puppet in your hands. So if you have brought me here to dance, then make me dance. Make me dance, O Lord, make me dance as you like." That's, of course, a famous stanza from his Markine Bhagavad Dharma poem Prabhupada wrote on the Jalandhara as it was docked in Boston Harbor. During his first year in the West, when the Lord revealed to Prabhupada he would have to start a fresh branch of the Gaudiya Sampradaya, the same educational purpose he had announced for the League of Devotees, he now formalized in ISKCON's incorporation papers. So this is the first purpose that we read in that 7 purposes of ISKCON. Quote, to systematically propagate spiritual knowledge to society at large and to educate all peoples in the techniques of spiritual life in order to check the imbalance of values in life and to achieve real unity and peace in the world. So 6 more points followed, all reflecting the same educational mood and mission. And by the way, there's another document. I don't know if I mentioned it last time, but if you do go, and if you have the database and you go into legal documents, there's another document that Prabhupada drew up 6 days before ISKCON was incorporated on the 7th of July. He drew up what he called his Constitution of Association, which is a more expanded version of those the 7 purposes. It was kind of a condensed version for the tight legal document that had to be done so ISKCON could be recognized as a legal nonprofit tax-exempt organization in America. But Prabhupada actually had a lot more in mind. And if you do go into that database, you can read a more expanded version of what Prabhupada had in mind for ISKCON. It's really more of a society-wide document, how ISKCON is going to become a true society. Okay, so just a little note there. Now in 1976, that's 10 years later, 10 years after he had incorporated ISKCON, Prabhupada was back in New York City to celebrate Rath Yatra, the temple's first chariot parade. Reflecting on his society's global expansion in such a short time, Prabhupada compared ISKCON to Varahadev, the Lord's boar incarnation. As Lord Varaha had appeared from the nostril of Lord Brahma, and then quickly assumed a cosmic form, so ISKCON had appeared in a tiny storefront, a little, quote, hole in the wall, as we say in English, on New York's Lower East Side, and quickly covered the earth. It had done so because Prabhupada had been utterly and absolutely surrendered to Krishna's plan, whose, quote, movements, that's what Prabhupada called them. He also called them waves. And for the sake of this lesson, and also for clarity, I just call them phases, because you'll see as Prabhupada developed ISKCON, he developed it in phases, and those phases developed in different sequences in different parts of the world, as is normal, actually. So when Prabhupada he started ISKCON in America. That's the context, the American context. So I call the phase, this is my naming, holy names and holy books. So we're going to look at references from Prabhupada's references to Gandhi in India when he was still trying to preach in India with not too much receptivity. But he was working out, he was articulating his mission in terms of the same kind of points that Gandhi had focused on. You'll see what I mean as the lesson goes on, but let's just start with the first one. So the first, we'll look at Gandhi roots of the phases, and then we'll look at Prabhupada's practical application of those phases according to the time, the country, the candidates. So the first reference comes in a BTG piece, May 20th, 1956. Quote, leaders and politicians may take lessons from the life of Mahatma Gandhi in respect of his daily evening prayer meetings and regular recitation of Bhagavad Gita. Reciting the Gita makes one able to get rid of the demoniac way of life and gradually rising up to the plane of pure devotional life of the gods. So Prabhupada knew that everybody knew Gandhi, but no one knew him. So he was always evoking Gandhi to get people interested in taking Gandhi's vision to a transcendental level. Okay, so next slide. Yes, so there it is, holy names, holy books. Yeah, that's good. That's fine. Launching ISKCON in 1966, Prabhupada was the exemplar of ecstatic devotion. Brows knit, his eyes slit in concentration, Quote, Swamiji led his first followers in chanting Hare Krishna for hours together inside the storefront that first summer, then outside in nearby parks that fall. Those publicized outings were an historic marker in Prabhupada's public outreach, which he continued to expand globally through his followers. So it started in Tompkins Square Park in New York City, but then as more temples were expanded, then that's what people did. They went out and they also chanted. So by the time I joined, for example, in the summer of 70, there were some, 35, 40 temples all over the world. Nothing compared to today, but it was still, bigger than just New York City. And so Americans, especially, most of the temples were in America, they got used to seeing us on the street corners. That's how they knew us. They didn't know us from what we were doing inside our little urban temples, but we were sure visible on their street corners. Back at the storefront, Prabhupada would hold Bhagavad Gita classes every Monday. So here we go with the holy books, holy names, holy books. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evening. Since Prabhupada had not finished translating his Bhagavad Gita as it is, he used the version of a famous impersonalist whose commentary Prabhupada exposed as misleading speculation. That, of course, is Dr. Radhakrishnan's Bhagavad Gita, impersonal Gita. Not until late 1968 would his own as it is edition appear, especially for his followers. Till that time, Prabhupada himself was the main focus. The holy names and holy books issuing from one empowered holy man. Prabhupada was he was the whole show. All rolled into one. To impress upon his followers their responsibility to continue spreading Krishna's teachings after he was gone, Prabhupada had them start an American edition of Back to Godhead. And here we have contrasted one of the first, if not the first issue, with how it became just in a few years. Rolling off old mimeograph machines at first, by the end of the decade, BTG had become a colorful magazine, whose copies ISKCON devotees would offer people gathered round their street chanting parties. These were the infant days of the literature distribution that would become a hallmark of Prabhupada's movement. Yeah, when I joined, that's what we did. We went on Harinam, and then after 20 minutes, after a crowd had gathered around us, because we were kind of a novelty, a spectacle, the summer of 70 this was, then somebody would step out from the party and speak, introduce us, who we are, what we're doing. And while the speaker was speaking, then a few brave devotees would go around with a stack of BTGs in one arm and maybe a collection basket in the other hand. That was it. That was the Sankirtan movement. There was no book distribution yet. We didn't, although there were a couple of books, we didn't know how to distribute them. We were magazine at the magazine platform. Okay, so that was phase one, holy names, holy books. Phase two, temples and deities. In the above mentioned 1956 BTG article, Prabhupada cited Gandhi's, quote, temple entry movement to show the crucial role temples play in a spiritual revolution. Though Gandhi was known as a, quote, politician among saints, Prabhupada praised him for trying to restore the deity forms of Krishna to temples desecrated by Hindu-Muslim violence. Unfortunately, he wrote, the temples have become, quote, rendezvous of demoniac dance, so many plague spots for preaching atheism, unquote. Hence his proposal to regenerate the temples as centers of spiritual education. For years, I I couldn't understand what Prabhupada meant. Rendezvous of demoniac dance. I mean, this is the mid-50s, and rock and roll was just coming in America with the iconic Elvis Presley. But I couldn't imagine that Indians were rock and roll dancing in the 50s. So, but one time, and I was presenting this in India, and one Indian devotee said, "No, what Prabhu, rendezvous of demoniac dance doesn't mean that the youth were rock and roll dancing in the temples, but that Sahajas were coming in the temples and doing these grotesque fake Gopi Bhav dances." So that's what Prabhupada meant by rendezvous of demoniac dance. Okay, so Prabhupada was saying that actually what we really need the temples to be is are centers of spiritual education. During ISKCON's launch a decade later, so in '66, as Prabhupada's raw recruits became practiced to chant Hare Krishna and hear Bhagavad Gita, worshipable images often appeared first as devotional paintings in low-rent storefronts, then as imported sacred statues, which came to bless former churches. Excuse me. So I think in a previous lesson we showed Jadharani Mataji's Panchatattva painting in 26th Second Avenue storefront window. And that was actually the first worshipable image in ISKCON. Then by the time I joined in '70, Prabhupada, he was, let's see, 71, a little later. Anyway, he was importing murtis from India to ISKCON centers in America, mainly. Now, next slide. Yes. So, although that was generally the sequence, from early paintings to imported images, in '67, something out of the ordinary happened. Surprisingly, quote, homemade forms, not imported from India, but homemade forms, actual deities, appeared right away in the first San Francisco temple, a storefront in the heart of America's counterculture. So there you see in the slide on the left is the installation of the Jagannath deities. And on the right, you'll see Prabhupada out in Golden Gate Park on Hippie Hill. And I'll tell you in a minute how that happened. It was rather unorthodox. So Prabhupada asked a skilled devotee to carve deities modeled after figurines spotted in an import store in San Francisco. Never mind that the carver's wife had pilfered them. This is Malati Devi's famous, shoplifting the figurines, had pilfered them, or that the carver himself, her husband, Shamsundar, wasn't yet following the principles of Krishna consciousness. Yeah, they weren't even initiated yet. Inclusive Prabhupada. So Prabhupada didn't stop Prabhupada. Inclusive Prabhupada was inviting everyone to appreciate the deity in his unusual form as Jagannath, the Lord of the universe. So if you know from the Lilamrita, Prabhupada asked Shamsundar to carve the deities. He did. And then he was still smoking cigarettes. So I think we told the story about Prabhupada very gently got him to give that habit up, at least while he was carving the deities. And then Prabhupada installs these deities right? In the heart of, the counterculture, the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco. And where else but in psychedelic San Francisco would people so easily accept his invitation and bow down before Lord Jagannath's large festive eyes? Prabhupada was thus able to slip deities past the iconoclasts and give them to Westerners. So Western culture, of course, such as it is, rooted in the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, did not like deity worship. They thought that was worshiping idols. Idols in the sense of made up images. So, but in San Francisco, where the people were coming to the temple to, as Allen Ginsberg, the poet, put it, Swami Bhaktivedanta space station. It's a good place to stabilize on re-entry from your all-night LSD trip. So people were coming in the early morning, and then throughout, and especially for the midday meal, for lunch. And then one fine day, they noticed these big forms in the temple, because Prabhupada saw that Krishna had appeared to him, and he wanted to immediately install Lord Jagannath. To this day, the Berkeley Temple is across the bay from San Francisco, is called New Jagannath Puri. So the people came in, and they were coming down from their trip, and they loved the devotees because the devotees were feeding them. The city of San Francisco commended the devotees for feeding all these thousands of people were coming into, and the city wasn't equipped to handle it, So they really appreciated the devotees stepping in and feeding all these hippies coming in. So those hippies, they were open to anything. It was the era of exploring everything, every last speculation, every last psychoactive substance to so-called expand your mind. So when they asked the devotees who that was, they kind of looked like Native American totems. And so the devotees said, well, that's Lord Jagannath. Jagannath means the Lord of the universe. That's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And his expansions playing the role of his brother and sister. So the counterculture warriors were open to anything. So they just, far out, man, so they just bowed down. They just followed the devotee's lead. They just bowed down and accepted him as the supreme being. So that's how Prabhupada took advantage, and Lord Jagannath took advantage of that little pocket of openness amid Western iconoclastic culture to establish deity worship. Very bold, very creative. That Lord Jagannath chose to come in that way, and Prabhupada followed the Lord's lead and established them. But the other slide, in that slide you saw, on the left you saw that's a rare picture too. You saw the long hairs in there, and they're all singing to these far out festive deities. And then on the right, you see Prabhupada on Hippie Hill with Lord Jagannath. That was a one-time thing, because Prabhupada, he came, he was staying in his apartment near the temple in the Haight-Ashbury. And so he came one day he would come out to see how the devotees were doing in their Sankirtan in Golden Gate Park, which is a beautiful venue. It still is. Golden Gate Park is like the jewel of San Francisco. Big, huge, green wooded area. So Prabhupada came out to the park one day after he had installed the deities, and then he saw Lord Jagannath out there with the devotees. And he didn't say anything at the moment. He just sat down with the devotees and chanted. There's the picture. There's Lord Jagannath. Prabhupada just sort of flowed with it, and he was chanting with them. and all the hippies are, who knows, what state of mind they were in. But anyway, and then back at the temple, Prabhupada told the devotees, the Lord Jagannath, he does come out of the temple. He's the only one that does that, but he comes out once a year during his festival called Ratha Yatra. And so that was 67. That was in the spring. So when he did came back in the summer, they had their first Ratha Yatra, flatbed Hertz Renner truck. That was the Rat. Okay, so the first two, it was Holy Names and Holy Books was phase one. Temples and deities, phase two. Now, phase three is a good example of how the phases played out differently in different parts of the world. So let's look at phase three, initiation and congregation. In a 1949 letter to Indian Deputy Prime Minister Dr. Sardar Patel, Prabhupada wrote, quote, the third item, right, in Gandhi's movement, is to take up the Harijan movement. This movement is, in the real sense, a spiritual initiation movement, and this should be organized in such a manner that people all over the world may take interest in it, unquote. The, quote, Harijan movement was Gandhi's attempt to allow everyone into the temples, not just the higher castes, by declaring everyone as Harijana, quote, a person of God. That's true, Prabhupada noted, but in order for everyone to become fit to associate with the Lord, the Harijanas must be initiated into a restorative path. They must be purified. So slide 8. So we get a look at initiation and congregation. There's Prabhupada. I'm not sure where he is, but he's initiating the Vaishnavi. And then you see the congregation photo on the right. As crude metal is said to transmute to gold in an alchemical process, so even a crude human being, by accepting initiation from a bona fide spiritual master, can gradually be restored to his original spiritual nature. That's an image from Hari Bhaktivilas Sanatana Goswami. Initiated devotees would gradually become the core of a wider congregation whose evolution would vary from country to country. So initiation was first in the West, and congregation mainly came before initiation in the East, in India. And we'll see how that played out. When Prabhupada brought his first Western disciples to India, for example, this was in 1971, they were the talk of the nation. Why would materially successful Westerners give up everything to dance and sing Hare Krishna in the streets? Quote, you want to imitate Westerners? Prabhupada would chide his countrymen. Then imitate these Westerners. They are fed up with so-called modern civilization, unquote. Rather, quote, the material advancement of the Western countries and the spiritual assets of India should combine for the elevation of all human society. That's the 4th canon purport. Now, concerned that Indians might come to see the Western devotees as mere performers, parenthesis, some observers were already dismissing them as, quote, spiritual hippies, or even CIA spies. So Prabhupada knew that people were skeptical in India, that these were really Vaishnavas. Perhaps the CIA had paid off the Swami to bring in spies, Americans during the Cold War era, because India was trying to stay neutral between Russia and the West. And let's see, or they thought maybe they're just high on LSD, and that's why they're singing and dancing in the streets. Prabhupada, so seeing that, the Indian press, it started with the journalists, they were skeptical of us being real Vaishnavas. Prabhupada temporarily suspended the devotees' street chanting and engaged them in a new program, life membership. For supporting ISKCON, well-established members would receive whatever publications and accommodations the society could offer them. Such respectable people would become ISKCON's first congregational members, as well as invaluable allies in the struggle to establish Prabhupada's movement in India. Especially Giriraj Maharaj finally came out with his book about the saga of establishing Juhu, Hare Krishna land. So you see, where if you read that book, you see, or just even the excerpts from the Lamrita, what valuable allies those first life members became, because they were well placed in society. They had connections in government and business. So invaluable allies. Now in the West, where people in general often regard, and still this is true, Krishna consciousness as, quote, foreign, the congregation has taken more time to develop. Initially living and trained inside temples, Prabhupada's first Western followers have since spread out into the community, working and raising families to become congregational members themselves. So we all started just in temples, and then after Prabhupada left, we got older and people started, marrying and working and looking like everybody else. So it became, it went from a temple-based movement to a congregational movement in the West. And also, what do I say here? The Indian diaspora, the dispersion of the Indian community all over the world, starting in the 60s, and the rise of yoga culture worldwide have also helped turn ISKCON into a congregational movement. So we have Indian folks all over the world, and in America too, and in the UK, and everywhere. And also the fascination with yoga all over the world has helped turn into a congregational movement. To move the Hare Krishna movement from the margin to the mainstream, Prabhupada identified a fourth phase his followers still need to embrace and develop. So we'll go back to the articulation of Prabhupada's mission, starting with him still being in India. So in the same letter to Dr. Patel, Prabhupada wrote, this is back in 49 too, quote, the fourth item is to organize the much discussed caste system as a solution of the natural division of human beings all over the world. Nationalistic division of human races is artificial, but scientific division of the caste system by quality and work, as envisaged in the Bhagavad Gita, is natural. So there, let's see, one more click there. Yeah, there you go. Varnashram culture then and now. So Prabhupada didn't shy away from saying to Dr. Patel, the deputy PM, he didn't shy away from saying caste system, but not the corrupted caste system, people claiming power and privilege by birth, but the real caste system by quality and work, guna karma, that Krishna mentions in Gita 4:13. And that's natural. To show the world a better way to live, based on the Gita's teachings, is the final phase of Prabhupada's mission. As the body's different parts are equally appreciated for their contribution to the whole body's welfare, so the social body's different phases, social body's different classes should be equally valued for their role in serving the Supreme Lord. High or low, head to toe, deep inside, we're all God's servants. And then here's another reference from those early days. This is a 1948 essay called The Conception of Gita Nagari, Part 2. Quote, when the Gita Nagari will attempt to harmonize such sweet relation between man and God, man and the world and God, at such an auspicious time only, the United Nations' effort to establish peace in the world will be successful. Or the dream of a casteless society of spiritual equality all over the world will be realized in practice. Everybody's protesting. They want freedom, equality, brotherhood, but they're trying to do it on the bodily concept. It doesn't work. But spiritually it works when we recognize that we're all deep down actually spirit souls. Because living the way Krishna lives amid his land and cows looks and feels very different from the way most of us live in the modern world. And because the first 3 phases of Prabhupada's mission are perhaps more easily adaptable to modernity, we have been slow to approach phase 4, whose Sanskrit name is Varnashram. Yet it is the timeless and natural spiritual life we in our modern world have been seeking and desperately need to recover. Okay, that's why I put on that slide on the right side, you had the classic Vedic Varnashram image, and then you had on the right, you had the Gita Nagari Eco Village, and it's a rebranding of Varnashram for the modern day, and it's doing very well. I lived there for 13 years under the old urban commune model. We were like city slickers living in the country, and it didn't really work because Varnashram is not communal, it's community. And so if you go to Gita Nagari today, you have a very successful Ahimsa dairy and Ahimsa CSA agriculture. And it's actually, we've gotten grants from the government to do it because the government, it's very cool, it's very progressive to be eco-friendly and to be showing sustainable technology and to do organic farming. This is the wave of the future to make the planet survive. Okay, so with a better understanding of the conception and unfolding of our founder Acharya's mission, in lesson 6, that's the next lesson, we'll look closer at this final phase and why it has so challenged us. Okay, so we're going to do Q&A now, but this is the hard part. The hard part is that when we do Q&A now, everyone's going to immediately want to jump to that 4th phase, Varnashram, because that's what we haven't done. And everybody's got their opinions of how to do it. And we'll take a look at that in the next lesson. So I'm inviting everybody now to ask questions or make their comments based on those other phases. Anything else but Varnashram. This lesson took you to the threshold of the 4th phase. And we're going to look at that in depth next time. Okay, with that caveat, please, let's hear from you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Bol.
Prabhuji, in the past also, devotees have asked about the unique relationship Prabhupada had with Mahatma Gandhi. He was a supporter. They respected him more as a moralist later on and said he didn't have a spiritual training. So, can you elaborate a little bit upon the unique relationship Prabhupada had with Mahatma Gandhi and how he had respect for him as a moralist, but not as a spiritual person, At least that's
a good question.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Did we talk about this before?
No, Prabhu.
Okay. Okay, good. Yeah, it was a very Srila Prabhupada's relationship with Mahatma Gandhi was very deep and very complex. So, as you know from Vilamrita, Prabhupada was following Gandhi. I mean, at least externally. He was, of course, in a Vaishnava family, and all the indications were from birth that he was a Mukta Purush, a liberated soul. He was doing his own Rath Yatra at the age of 5. He was very serious about that. It wasn't just a kid's game, you know. It was very, he was attracted to doing that even as a little boy. So if you know from Lilamrita, we discussed in lesson 4 how Prabhupada went to meet the person who became his Guru Maharaj. He didn't want to go because he'd been disappointed with so many so-called sadhus that his father would feed. And he also thought it was good that India was trying to get the British out of their country. And so he had passed his exams at Scottish Churches College and the University of Calcutta system, but he refused the British diploma. Because Gandhi was telling everyone to boycott all things British, from clothes to diplomas, right? So he did. He didn't show up, which is a rather bold move. So, but as soon as he met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, and Bhaktisiddhanta showed him that, you know, trying to find freedom and equality through so many movements, including Gandhi's, was not really useful. Krishna consciousness, it's only Krishna consciousness, is the urgent need, is the emergence. That's the real, and that's the only lasting freedom and equality on the spiritual platform. So as soon as Prabhupada heard that, Abhay Charande heard that, his allegiance flew right from Gandhi to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. So he was like, as we say, dry tinder. You know, he was ignitable. His Krishna consciousness, which was there, but it wasn't manifest in a blazing way. By the time he was in college, Prabhupada actually said he put his deities away, and because he was absorbed in his studies, although he wasn't swayed at all by the British propaganda that their culture was inferior. You know, Shakespeare in the Bible was what they were pushing on the Indian students. But he knew the superiority of Bhagavatam and the whole culture of bhakti. But he thought it would be wise to at least get the British first out of India. Then we can, because then that's what he said to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. Bhaktisiddhanta defeated him. Prabhupada said, I was very happy to be defeated by my Guru Maharaj. And I accepted him immediately, not officially, but in my heart. He was officially initiated 11 years later in Allahabad as a Vayacharana Arvind Das. So, and after his own Guru Maharaj passed away, and the Gaudiya Math imploded, fragmented, because of personal ambition, Prabhupada stayed aloof from the fray, and he just was meditating on how to do that mission. So it started with BTG. That was kind of the first focus that Prabhupada did. He started a magazine. And then, you know, Gandhi passed away. He was trying to engage, you know, after the British got kicked out of India, after they lost the empire because of Gandhi's movement, and also more, Prabhupada said, from the militancy of Subhash Chandra Bose organizing an Indian National Army. Then Prabhupada tried to engage Gandhi, his fame and his respect, but he was assassinated. Gandhi didn't listen to him. That letter he wrote, or who knows if he even got it, but he was ignored. And then Prabhupada finally found a first receptive audience in Jhansi. So even though Prabhupada knew that, as Prabhupada would say, quoting a famous journalist, was saying, either Gandhi is a politician among saints or a saint among politicians. And Prabhupada said, yeah, that's right. He had his foot in both worlds, and finally that political world was his undoing. And he didn't really understand the Bhagavad Gita as it is. He was trying to use the Gita as his own, as an excuse to push his own nonviolence, ahimsa. But that's not really what got the British out of India, the nonviolence. So, so Prabhupada, he always held, he would always, when he would talk to us about Gandhi, he would talk about that he was very, saintly, and he was very austere, and he was self-controlled, and he got the Shakti of being self-controlled from his austerity. And so he was a moralist. He was a moral person. He wanted to improve India's lot, and he wanted to get the British, the immoral British, who've done so much atrocities to the Indian people, murders, all this stuff, out. So he respected him for that. He was kind of like his boyhood hero, right? He was somebody to rally around to get the British out of India. But ever since he was committed to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta and his Gaudiya mission, as he said to his friend Narendranath Mullik, here is a person who can really, I see that Lord Chaitanya's movement is in good hands. So Prabhupada was a Chaitanya, he was a Gaudiya Vaishnava, but he didn't see any future really in the movement. But now when he met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he could see, wow, this person, yeah, he could really do something, which he did. So he would praise Gandhi for being a very moral person, but he would condemn him because he was trying to use the Gita for his own purposes. And this kind of ambivalent relationship he had with Gandhi was brought into focus by my godbrother Bhagavad Prabhu, who was in Bombay, and so I think it was during I guess they gotten the Juhu temple. I forget what stage it was in, if we had actually gotten it. The temple wasn't finished in Prabhupada's time, but Prabhupada was engaging in this ongoing epic struggle with the infamous Mr. Nair. And anyway, so Bhagavad was happened to be in Bombay. I think Prabhupada had actually called him to help the project. Yeah, and so one room. This is also in the database. You can hear the subject of Prabhupada of Mahatma Gandhi comes up in a room conversation one evening with some Indian gentlemen, and Prabhupada's praising Gandhi for being such a moral person and for helping drive the British out of India, and like that. And everybody's very happy because Prabhupada's praising Gandhi, and everybody loves Gandhi. And so then the next day, I believe it was the next day, but anyway, shortly after, they were on a morning walk, these famous Juhu Beach morning walks. And Prabhupada would go on his morning walk. He would walk a half hour in one direction and a half hour back, so it was a full hour of exercise. And then the subject of Mahatma Gandhi came up again. And in this instance, somebody brought up Mahatma Gandhi and his love of the Gita, and Prabhupada chose the opposite mood. Prabhupada said, actually, Mahatma Gandhi, he did not know anything about Bhagavad Gita. He did not know the Gita. And so because Prabhupada was criticizing Gandhi for not knowing the Gita, the Indian people were on the walk. They got mad at Prabhupada. How can you say this? Gandhi is so great, and you're criticizing him. And everyone knows that Bhagavad Gita was Gandhi's book of inspiration, his favorite book. And Prabhupada, the more they raised their voice, the more Prabhupada raised his voice. And if you hear the recording, it's like a big shouting match. They would make a point, and Prabhupada would raise his voice higher and make another point. And then right in the heat of battle, and Bhagavat's on the walk too. And he's astonished because he had just heard Prabhupada praising Gandhi the night before, in the room conversation. And now Prabhupada's blasting Gandhi. And so at one point in the walk, Bhagavat stopped right close to Prabhupada as he's in the middle of the heat of battle. And he's shouting back at the Indian people objecting to his criticism. And right in the middle, because Prabhupada had not looked at Bhagavat to that moment. And all of a sudden, Prabhupada looked at Bhagavat and gave him a look that said, "You believe me then," which means the night before, "you believe me now." So it was a complicated relationship Prabhupada had with Gandhi. But, and then Vishaka Mataji, my god sister, she was on another morning walk with Prabhupada and Juhu. And she was employed, of course, as a photographer. Her husband was a movie maker and she was the photographer. She was a world-class photographer. So one day on the morning walk, Prabhupada took his walk, and then all of a sudden, Vishaka said, Prabhupada went way out of his way. He went way off his normal route. And we didn't know, what's Prabhupada doing? And all of a sudden, they start walking, and in the distance, Vishaka sees this something in the sand in the distance. And as they approach, she can see it's a statue. And then as they get real close, they see it's a statue of Mahatma Gandhi on Juhu Beach. Because all over India, you see these things. You see these memorials to Gandhi. And it might have even been the one that you saw on the slide. But anyway, it was that kind of a statue. And so, without a word, Prabhupada led the devotees on the walk around the statue. They actually, 3 times, they circumambulated the statue to honor Mahatma Gandhi. And Prabhupada didn't say a word. So there he is on the same beach that he's blasting Gandhi, but then he also wants to show the devotees how to respect an exalted personality, even if he isn't, a transcendentalist on the highest levels of devotion like Prabhupada. So it was a very complex relationship, and you have to know the context to understand Prabhupada's intents. To understand the contents of his word, you have to know the context and his intent to different audiences to make different points clear. We respect him. Juva nitir matir mama. Even Krishna says that or Sanjaya said, wherever there is Krishna, the master of all mystics, wherever there is Arjuna, the supreme archer, there will also certainly be opulence, victory, extraordinary power, and morality, niti, natir mama, juva nitir matir mama. So we respect people, leaders who actually are moral, because my God, there's so many examples of immoral leaders these days, especially in America. So I think that's all I can say about that question. And now I've talked myself out of any more questions. No, you can ask. Go ahead. But not too much.
So we can summarize, Prabhuji, that Prabhupada had a respect for him as an individual, as a moralist, and wherever he found that being favorable helps in preaching, he would do that. But he was very clear on the principal part, that because he had no spiritual education, so he didn't know how to take further one. But he had the right, one should say, maybe inclination to help, but he didn't have that spiritual training, so he couldn't help people spiritually.
Yeah, that's good. He had a good intention.
Thank you, Prabhuji. And
Yeah.
one just last short one, Prabhuji, because we have Jagannath Yatra tomorrow in our temple.
Oh, okay, right.
And somehow this our class also took this in that period. I just want to ask Prabhuji, no controversy, just as a thought, what is your opinion that now India has agreed that all Jagannath yatras in India will be held between the same week when Jagannath Puri Yatra happens? There is an agreement within ISKCON and Jagannath Puri temple management. Now there won't be any Jagannath Rath Yatras anywhere in India except for the week where the Jagannath Puri Yatra happens in Puri. So it's only for India. Outside India, they don't bother. What is your opinion about it, Prabhuji, that we such kind of agreement we do, that it was not? What is your opinion? Because it is not Prabhupada moved to that Jagannath Rath Yatras. He started rather. He's the first one who started that any date, anything he started. And it was not meant in the West only. But another thing is constant, pressure from Jagannath, management, temple management and all.
So why don't you inform me? So what's the situation in India is it the Puri Pandits have asked ISKCON not to hold their Rath Yatras during the actual time of their Rath Yatra? Is that it?
No, Prabhuji. On the contrary, they have told that ISKCON can hold Rath Yatras only in the same week. They have given a 7-day window.
Oh, only in the same week.
Only same week. And ISKCON has agreed not to hold any Jagannath Rath Yatras, other than this week, anywhere in India. Outside India, there is no such agreement.
Well, because they say that's the real Rath Yatra time.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And well, I guess that works in India because, well, that's not true. I was going to say because of the climate, because you also have cold weather and really warm weather. I mean, in America, we have to space them according to the climate. Like if we try to do it in the summer here, nobody would come because it's too bloody hot. But so when it's really, really hot, then we do it, in the fall. And also in Australia, they do it just the opposite. They do it in the winter, because so, I mean, ISKCON's ethos, its distinguishing cultural characteristic is whatever's going to spread Krishna consciousness the best. That's what's favorable. So in India, the Indian ISKCON has agreed to the Puri's request to only hold their Rath Yatras that 1 week.
Yes, Prabhuji.
Okay, well, maybe that's favorable because we're honoring the original Puri Rath Yatra. I mean, I can see Prabhupada saying that, yeah, let's, keep the peace. And there's certainly enough devotees in every place in India that it's not that we're going to worry that the Puri Rath Yatra is taking away our yatris. No, we'll have plenty of people to worship, to take part in our Rath Yatra. And now I went to a Rath Yatra, where was it? It was in Mumbai. It was, maybe this is before ISKCON agreed to this, because in 2015, I was in a Rath Yatra, in Mumbai. And it was in the winter. So when did this thing happen with the?
I think in last few months only.
Oh, okay, I see. Okay, because of the Puri people, their worry is that we're taking away from their Rath Yatra?
Well, because they're more, they gave, I think their argument was when you celebrate all the other tithis, so similarly, there's a tithi for, Jagannath to come out, which is a Snani Yatra time, and the Rath Yatra time. So why you are doing something which is not sanctioned by the Shastras? And as the tradition,
sanctioned by what? Sanctioned by whom?
by the Shastra, the tradition, that continues. So why you want to break the tradition? So you want to hold Rath Yatra, that is fine, but you hold it in the same time period.
Okay, so there is, right, so in Shastra, there's actually the Titi, or the actual lunar day, when these things happen. It's described like that, the Shastra?
Yes, Ruji, because that amazing thing is there, the Snan Yatra time is there, and the Rath Yatra time, in the local, whatever they do is there. But my question was more on that, because that was not Prabhupada's mood. I'm not to generate a controversy. I'm saying it was not his mood to constrain that Jagannath Yatra only for one. And he didn't even enter Jagannath Puri, because his disciples were not,
Yeah, well, that's kind of another thing. I mean, it's true. Prabhupada said the Lord is not Purinath, he's Jagannath. So if you don't let him, let our people in, then we're not coming. This is very sectarian. And I think Prabhupada even predicted that the Lord, if you don't let us in, the Lord will leave. And they're afraid of that prediction, right? So both things are there. Prabhupada, his point was for, and yeah, certainly for preaching, that was Prabhupada's preaching point, that the Lord is open for everyone who's following. Like he said, he took Gandhi's Harijan point to a higher level. Yeah, everybody's people of God, but then they have to undergo a process to become fit to associate with the Lord, worship the Lord in the temple, which Prabhupada's doing. And that's why he said, you should let us in, because these people are qualified. They're doing more than anybody here to spread Krishna consciousness all over the world, despite all your Paka rituals and everything. So, yeah, so it actually, I don't know what to say. I think the Indian, you better ask the devotees in India these questions, because they know better Prabhupada's mood in India. I mean, I can speak generally, but Prabhupada, he has his whole organization in India, which is different from the rest of the world. So, yeah, I have to defer there.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I just wanted a point of view. That's it.
Yeah, well, I think my point of view is inadequate. I'm not qualified.
So, thank you.
But I can certainly see both things. I could see him doing that. I can see him, acquiescing to the Puri Pandit's request that we do like that. And still, we wouldn't have any lack of, attendees at our festivals by agreeing to what they say. If it did hurt our preaching, I think Prabhupada would say, forget that. It's not favorable for us spreading Krishna consciousness. But if it is favorable for spreading in the Indian context, then yeah, why not? I can see him doing that.
Yes, Roji. And now many temples, they're innovated, Roji. So they have, other times they have Krishna Balram Yatra, Krishna Rath Yatra, like this. They have started. Like, yes, Roji.
Huh. They bring the deities out of the temples.
Yes, Roji. So other time they want to hold Rath Yatra, so they call it Krishna Balram Rath Yatra or something. So they don't bring Jagannath out. So they bring some other deity out and take the Rath Yatra, because that nobody can object.
Well, I'm wondering what Prabhupada would say about that. Because as far as I know, only Krishna in his Jagannath form leaves the temple. I'd like to see some Guru Sada Shastra supporting that. Yeah. Okay, I think I better leave you, but it's good to reconnect.
Yes. Thank you, Prabhuji. We are so grateful to you. And such auspicious time we heard about the appearance of Jagannath, in ISKCON, and tomorrow we have Jagannath Puri Yatra in our temple. So very nice coincidence. So thank you so very much, Prabhu. And all of us, we heartily thank Prabhuji, and we look forward to the next session. Yes, Varnashram is a complex topic within ISKCON. So
yes,
and Prabhuji is very qualified to speak about that topic. So we look forward to hear. And now we heartily thank Prabhu by loudly chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Ram, Ram Ram. His Grace Prabhu ki jai, Jagadguru Srila Prabhupada ki jai,
Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki jai.
Hare Krishna.
Okay, we'll be in touch about the next session.
Yes. Hare Krishna.
Hare Hare Bol.
Hare
Let's see.